Hello, hello.
Hi,
How are you?
I am good. How are you?
Very good. So good to see you. So good to actually like do this face to face. We're always just talking on Instagram, and this is kind of
Yes,
nice to actually be able to talk in person. Yeah. How are you today? What have
I
you been up
am
to?
amazing today. I went and got my
Hmm.
nails done, and I've had a
Amazing.
couple of really cool meetings with really cool people. And this is my last super cool meeting with, cool people for the day. So I'm doing
Yay.
really well. And yeah, sunny Nairobi has had some rain today, which is not bad. But yeah, I'm doing
No.
good.
Honestly, that was one of my favorite things in Nairobi was when it rained,
Yeah,
just the feeling, the smell, also just the fact that like it
yeah,
almost feels like everything's on pause all of a sudden. It's really nice.
yeah,
It's really
yeah.
special.
It is. It is that petrichor smell. I think that's what it's called.
Yeah.
Especially after a hot day, there's really
Yeah.
nothing like it.
Mm-mm. No, absolutely not. No, but thank you for doing this. I'm really excited to chat with you a little bit today and let people get to know you a little bit too, because I've known you for so long, Reshma, so long. But I also feel like you've done so much in the time that we've been away that I think is of immense value. And I think it's really cool. So tell people a little bit about who you are and what are you doing.
Yeah, thanks. And speaking about long
Mm.
time, gosh, it's definitely over 30 years for sure. So
Yeah, no, Reshma, 30 years.
it's, oh
More.
gosh. I'm Reshma Aziz
Mm.
Khan. I am Kenyan based in Nairobi.
Mhm.
And how do I describe myself? So every day is a different day for me, but I see myself as a catalyst. So I'm a certified leadership coach and certified facilitator, and I spend my time running workshops and conferences around the world. But
Mhm.
really, the core essence of all of that for me is in all the things that I do is trying to support humans to better connect to each other because I find that's
Mm.
the reason for so many things like just dysfunctioning and not working well.
No, 100%. Like I was literally just commenting on that last night. I was like, one thing is that, you as people, we will constantly disagree. We will constantly be, in misalignment to a certain extent, but we should always give each other that space to feel that it's comfortable enough to actually have the conversation, feel acknowledged and feel seen. And then if we decide that, we're not in agreement, that's okay,
Yeah.
and but you've at least come and you've shared and you've felt like someone has seen where you're coming from a little bit, which I think is really, really great.
Absolutely, absolutely. And especially as
Yeah.
a facilitator when I work with groups, and now I'm doing a lot more with people, conflict resolution and people who are on
Hmm.
opposite sides of a thinking table. It's exactly that we need to be able to create spaces more where people, every single person, it doesn't matter what your belief is, you can be
Yeah.
seen and you can be heard and
Yeah.
listened to. And then beyond that,
100%.
if you don't agree, that's fine, but at least everyone's been
Hmm.
given the space to share their bit.
Absolutely. I think it's so key. I remember a few years ago I did this whole thing about building like a conversation pool with my therapist, and we talked a lot about the fact that like you have to almost invite people into your pool to be able to have an effective conversation, right? Like you cannot constantly just be like the pool cannot seem toxic, and then you're bringing people. People are going to be like, no, there's danger here. Like you
Yeah.
need to be welcoming enough to be able to say people can come in, talk, and then at the end of it, like if you guys are like going your own separate ways, you're going your own separate ways, but everyone has had an opportunity to say something. I also think it makes you more, to you a little bit of what we're going to talk about later, but like it makes you a more powerful leader to be that way, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. I think one of my biggest questions for you, like actually just get us started a little bit, is what is or what are good qualities of good leaders for you?
That's such a great question. So, I would say, first of all, I think leadership, any one of us is a leader in the work, like every single day of our lives, right? We don't have to
Hmm.
necessarily have the title of director, manager, leader. We lead ourselves every day through the over 35,000 choices we have to make every single day.
Yeah.
We lead ourselves in the choices we make for what we want to eat, the partners we want to have, everything.
Hmm.
And so I think all of us have that innate ability to lead ourselves that then drives our life. But then, of course, there's also the leadership of other people. And I
Yeah.
think in my experience, both for myself as a leader, actually in a role officially as a leader, but also leading my own life path, and in working now as a facilitator and coach with world leaders, primarily in the nonprofit space, I think that there's a couple of things I find really, really determine
Hmm.
what good leadership might look like. The first is the willingness, the commitment, and the authenticity to be vulnerable.
Yeah.
Um, to be vulnerable to say it's okay and to be okay with failure and to
Hmm.
show that to your team because then you're building trust. And the second is creating a space of equality, truly listening
Hmm.
to each other and deliberately taking whatever steps are needed to create those spaces. So really that vulnerability, that modeled vulnerability, that space, and then the steps to just connect humans to each other and really getting to know the humans who you're working with and who are working for you
Yeah.
beyond their job titles. I
Yeah.
think we get so busy in our lives today, just trying to do our own bit that we forget that behind every position is a human being who's having this human
Hmm.
existence and
Yeah.
this limited, finite journey. And so taking the time to really understand that human can really
Yeah.
shift your leadership and how you work with people, but also how you can positively influence people and how people will then be guided to be wanting to work with you.
No, absolutely. Like that resonates with me 100%. I think just this idea that, you know, that you have people that work for you, that you actually know, and that you actually understand, that you actually see, that I think is really, really key. I also love the fact that you've kind of highlighted the fact that, a good leader is someone who has that vulnerability, who has that ability to say, like, maybe things like I don't know or I want to learn, right? Because I think also we're so modeled and so patterned to think that a leader is faultless, that a leader has no, there are no weaknesses here. It's just
Yeah.
full armor, full readiness to deal with everything. But I think that the more human the leader appears to you, I think the better it is that they become as a leader, right? So I think that was really really key. From your experience overall, when you're working with leaders right now, what do you feel has always been something that like out of all of the cases that you've worked with, what is something that you consistently see? That's something that you're like, oh, that's something that's actually like now become a pattern, and I see it in almost like the majority of the cases that I work with.
Yeah, that's absolutely. So most of my work, over
Yeah,
98% of my work is with international nonprofits because that's the
yeah,
world I came from.
yeah.
Because prior to setting up my company in 2020, I worked for close to 15 years with a nonprofit called Care International. And so now I've worked with, major nonprofits around the world, global teams around the world. And what I consistently see is where
Hmm.
there is dysfunction, where teams are not working effectively, is where people have not taken the time to just connect as human beings. I also teach this at the UN University for Peace as part of a positive leadership course, in the fall and summer. And it consistently comes back to the space to connect as a human being. And I'll give you an
Hmm.
example. So last year, I was asked out of many facilitators, I was asked to run an offsite meeting for a large nonprofit,
Hmm.
one of their departments, and they were coming to Kenya from all over the world to meet. And they had, I think, four facilitators before me that had a couple of coaches. They had HR get involved because there was a real issue between about three or four people on the team. And this was the last straw. This one workshop was the
Right.
last straw before somebody was going to be fired. And so, of course, I went into this thinking, oh my gosh, like what can I potentially do that's going to help? So in
Yeah.
your head, you plan all these, oh yeah, let's do all these workshop things. And then on the first day, I realized, gosh, the two people who pretend are at the extreme ends of this conflict,
Hmm.
they simply just haven't gotten the time to see the human beyond their titles.
Right.
And so I stopped everything that was in my plans and said, you know what, this is not working. There were 16 people in the room. Let's all come together. Let's make a circle with chairs so we're all in the space of equality.
Hmm.
The director of this team was there as well. And
Hmm.
I asked everyone, I said, look, of course, no one's going to force you, but I'm going to ask you to share whatever you're comfortable sharing,
Hmm.
that you need, that is going on for you right now that affects how you show up.
Right.
and I didn't know what would come out of it. And it was incredible to see every single one of, the whole team,
Yeah.
15 people, and I'll come to the 16th, share what was going on for them. And some of it was really tough. One person was saying how she lived in the States, and every single weekend for 5 weekends, she had flown to a whole different state to try and pick up her brother from a domestic abuse family and before he took his own life.
Wow.
And the office didn't know that every Friday she
Hmm.
was flying to this other state. Somebody else had said that, he was in a part of Africa where 2 days before he came to this workshop, armed gunmen that were, government backed showed up in his house and put guns to his 15-year-old daughter's head. And
Mm-mm.
another one who had, just moved to Nairobi was talking about how he's really having an identity crisis and going through all of this. Every single person was going through immense trauma, right?
Yeah.
And in that moment, when those two people who were literally trying to get each other fired because they said, this is not working, when they
Right.
saw the human in each other, they literally took a step back, both
Hmm.
had tears and they said, "Oh my gosh, what have we been doing? What have we done?"
Hmm. Hmm.
And that night, after not wanting to even be in the same room together, that night they both went for a dinner together and they said, "We need
Yeah.
to talk to each other." And the reason I say 15, the 16th person was the director of this team.
Hmm.
And unfortunately, I think he was the weak link because he publicly refused to be vulnerable to this team.
Hmm.
And at the end of everyone's sharing, when I came to him and said, "Okay, it's your turn," he literally looked at every one of them and he did this. And he said, "That's so great. I'm so proud of you all for sharing. This is so great." So then I said, "Okay, but are you not going to share as the leader?" And he said, "No,
Yeah.
no one needs to know about me."
Mhm. Yeah, they do.
So while everyone else had sorted their issues, a couple of months
Yeah.
later, I heard that a lot of people left because of that lack of trust in the leader and
Yeah.
and the perceived lack of support in the leader. And only then did
Mhm.
we realize that even the situations that had happened that had warranted bringing me in and bringing ethics
Mhm.
lines in were all stemming from 18 months before when this director would not step into this human space and would not
Yeah.
just get into a room with these other two people and say, "As humans, let's just thrash this out in
Let's
this room."
talk.
He actually kept
Yeah.
them separated, and it caused a lot more damage than it should have. So, just to go back to your question, it what I find consistently is this golden thread is without
Mhm.
human connection, it doesn't matter
Mhm.
what industry you're in, you're
Mhm.
not really going to get to where you think you need to get to.
No, absolutely. And I think, you've touched on so many things that are so key, like at least from my experience that I feel like I personally feel like it's hard for me to take a leader seriously when a leader does not feel like a person. I'm
Yeah.
not, we're not all working for like some sort of like cartoon megalomaniac who just kind of is just there and is just so out of reach that we will never understand them, but we still are meant to operate and provide and work with them. I also think cohesively as a team, you always show your vulnerability to each other as coworkers. Like you have to show that vulnerability to each other. It's what binds you. I think it's what makes it's like any team. It's what makes the playing field all the more
Yeah.
manageable because you actually are able to say, no, I acknowledge their capacity, I acknowledge my capacity, and then together you're actually understanding how you can actually make this work. So knowing people, I think, is really really key. And so it's unfortunate that he was not able to come to that understanding with his team. But also at the same time, I feel like his reaction to kind of put them apart also makes sense now because you literally are like, no, this is someone who doesn't maybe even want to bring
Yeah.
those elements into work, and is going to make sure that like I'm keeping personal and work so separate. But you can still have that, right? But you can also still acknowledge where people are because at the end of the day, like work is work, but work is also your life, right? Like you go into work
Exactly.
and you literally are spending a portion of your life there, right? Those are memories that you're still building. You're still building relationships. You're still building connections. So to kind of say that they're always going to be separate, I feel like that's kind of like a misnomer.
Yeah. And it
Yeah.
actually, one of my earliest career lessons was, so of course, as you know, my mom passed away
Mm-hmm.
in December of 2010.
Mm-hmm.
And in October of 2010, I actually got my first full-time job with Care International at Care Kenya.
Right.
And before that, I had been working on consultancies with them for a couple of years. And after my mom passed, of course, I thought, oh, I'm strong. I have to be strong because, there's a choice in life. You either become the victim
Yeah.
and stay the victim, or
Yeah.
for me, it was like, well, I'm the only one who can take care of myself. And I remember towards March of 2011, I was,
Mhm.
I was grieving in a different way. So grief didn't
Yeah.
manifest as tears or as it does. Grief can look very
Mhm.
different. So part of
Absolutely.
my grief was severe body fatigue. And
Hmm.
so I would wake up a bit later and I would, the office would open at 8:30 a.m. and I would
Hmm.
sometimes actually in those months get there by 9:15 a.m., which is 45 minutes later.
Hmm.
And my manager at the time, this happened for a couple of weeks, and then she literally said, as soon as I walked in, she said, before you get to work, HR and I need to talk to you.
Hmm.
So I said, okay. So we go up to HR and I said, what's the issue? She said, you've consistently been coming 45 minutes late. And
Hmm.
um, not, and knowing my mom had passed because they had come to the funeral,
Right.
knowing that had
Right.
happened, didn't even ask. Literally,
Hmm.
immediate thing went to I remember her very distinctly looking to the HR lady and looking to me and saying, if we see this continue for another couple of weeks,
Hmm.
unfortunately, because you're still on probation, we're going to fire you. And not even
No.
understanding that actually this was a trauma
That
response,
this has
right? That this
happened. Yeah.
human is having
Yeah.
a
A
human
trauma.
reaction to something that has
Yeah.
happened in her life. And
Yeah.
actually, probably the better thing would have been to, before even getting to that conversation, to saying, okay, look, it's reflecting on you. Tell us what is going on, what is causing that, right? And that
Hmm.
lesson from 2011, that's 13 years ago, has stayed with me. And so even as I facilitate, I consistently see these patterns and think, gosh, this is where we need to flip the
Yeah.
switch on how we understand the humans as leaders, how we understand that we're all just humans having a human experience, and that you
Yeah.
can separate personal and professional. But what happens in your personal life, and as a coach, I often come across this, what happens in your personal life will inevitably affect how you show up at work,
Hmm.
so
Absolutely.
really
And
recognizing that.
yeah, no, you're 100% right. And I mean, it's really, I feel unfortunate that this manager was clearly not ready to kind of like connect those things together. And I feel like also just be a person, right?
Yeah.
At the end of the day, like that's what it comes down to. Like I feel like they were not just being a human, and they were not just being understanding. Also, just knowing too that you are so new to the role, and then not acknowledging the fact that like you're new to the role. A lot has happened. There's a lot of shifts there, right? Like it's trauma. It's also like dynamic. There's so
Yeah.
much going on. So that element of disconnect is it's hyper unfortunate, but also very real in the sense that like you know I think a lot of companies still operate in this way, but then always wonder why there's such a high amount of turnover, why there's such a high amount of people being dissatisfied with being there, or why people just
Yeah.
don't truly genuinely trust you as leaders. Like I think for me, at the end of the day, when it comes to looking for work, that is one of the biggest key factors, right? Like if I come into an interview and I feel like you're not talking to me as a person, as a human, then I'm not taking that job. Like why? Like why would
Yeah.
I show up to go and be a part of this, right? So I think even for you in that particular moment, like that was really really key for her to come and say to you, "Hey, look, I fully understand what's going on." It would have been better for them to even have said to you, we can give you the space to actually like figure this out, and
Yeah.
maybe if you want to come back at a later date, come back. Even just to say like if it's 45 minutes in a day, in my opinion, is not that much time. I also think 45 minutes at work, knowing how everyone works, is also not that much time. Your productive
Yeah.
hours typically in any kind of like company are typically 2 to 3 hours max. The rest of the time are just spent trying to like basically get to those 2 to 3 hours of constructive productivity. So going and saying that 45 minutes is such a big deal, I'm like, no,
Yeah,
no, like
exactly. Like
that's
take it out of my
ludicrous.
lunch. I don't actually have lunch. I had lunch at my desk, so I still caught up
There
and
you go.
and everything was still
No,
done. But it's so interesting because it sort of speaks to this old school version of what people think leaders should be, but it really is about
100%.
managers, right? That's not leadership, that's
Yeah,
management.
a hundred
And yeah,
percent. And I think like that's the interesting thing about it too, is that it has changed, right? Like what a leader looks like now is obviously not the same as what a leader looked like maybe in our parents' generation. The ideas, the concepts of what our expectations are as people maybe that
Yeah,
work with leaders, or will work with leaders, or when we become leaders, is so
yeah,
drastically different. It's really good like segue to like kind of my follow up question to that is, a part of what I think you've been doing a lot is also getting leaders to talk to other leaders. And when it comes to actually understanding power and your position, how much of that like acknowledgement, and the fact that like I have this power, I have this ability to be a leader, how much of that fits into this element of vulnerability? Because for me, when you actually like possess power in a way, I can understand also why you become less vulnerable, because you feel like that's how you're preserving power to a certain
yeah,
extent, because you're saying to yourself, if I'm not appearing relatable, I'm like they're going to see me as the all knowing, the all whatever, right? So how do you get leaders to even break down those barriers when they're even talking to each other? Because at that point, when I'm talking to another leader, it's like the power play means nothing, and I now have to communicate with this person, but also like I'm not ready to be vulnerable. Like how does that work?
yeah. Again, great question. So it's interesting. So I do a lot of work with leaders who are quite senior leaders in the global nonprofit space. And
Hmm.
it's exactly that, right? So you will get a mixed bag. There are some who are more willing to say, this is what I've been experiencing in this role. I'd love to hear
Hmm.
from you. Others who are so, it's that self-preservation that, I don't want to show up as vulnerable because I'm potentially competing with you for funds. So you're going to go and tell people
Hmm.
how weak I am. And so what I often find in spaces like that is really taking away all their titles, everything else, and this space of forced having a conversation with each other, forced equality, getting into
Yeah.
pairs and asking very specific questions that
Hmm.
will force someone to have to share something
Something.
that, it's not completely sensitive or too
Mm.
sensitive to not be shared. But um, it is interesting because also there's an older generation of humanitarian leaders who are this very typical, you know, and it's interesting. It's a very typical old white male, cowboy savior who looks at someone like me and thinks, "You don't know what you're talking about. I'm the expert. I,
Right.
I was
Yeah.
in X country, name it, Afghanistan, Somalia, whatever, when you were still a child."
Yeah.
And so it's harder to break through those leaders, but those ones are sort of being phased out by more diverse, by younger, by more open leaders who are
Hmm.
saying, if we want to scale up our impact, we have to be able to share our vulnerability with each other.
Hmm.
And
Yeah.
so it's those leaders where I find the conversations are really helpful. And there is a move for a lot of nonprofit leaders to even get into the space to say, okay, can we share our experiences? Where I meet them, even if I'm not officially facilitating, I tend to like to connect them. So here in
Hmm.
Nairobi or elsewhere, I say, oh, you're the, you're the director of advocacy for this. You need to meet the director of advocacy for that. Can I
Hmm.
connect you both? And can you guys just have a conversation? And can you
Yeah.
learn from each other? Maybe here's some
Yeah.
questions you can ask each other, or can I get you both on an email trail or hold this conversation with you two together? I think it works, but I think the self-preservation also comes from, I think there is a sense, it comes from an insecurity. It
Hmm.
really comes from an insecurity that if I tell you about me, you're going to
Yeah.
become better than me or you're going to go and tell someone else. But if you're truly
Yeah.
secure
Yeah.
with yourself, not to say you haven't failed, because we all fail, we feel terrible about it. Sometimes we
Hmm.
don't want to talk to others about our failures, and that's part of being human. But this
Yeah.
insecurity and this feeling of lack of control leads to people being, self-preservationist, and there's only so much
Hmm.
more you can do. And I also see it as a consultant in like other coaches and other facilitators. Like,
Yeah.
today I had a lunch meeting with someone who's a facilitator and she's newer to Nairobi and was telling me, "Oh, how do you do this?" And I was like, "I don't mind meeting you because I believe
Hmm.
there's enough work for all of us and all of us have our
Yeah.
niches, right?"
Yeah.
But there are others who are very guarded about
Yeah.
what they do and what they will even tell me. And I truly believe that when you're that guarded and you're not giving of
Hmm.
your time, you're not giving of your knowledge, you're not giving of your human story, I really believe that, you know, and I really believe in this whole idea of, the universe and the laws of attraction, that things don't come to you because you're not as open. It's only
No.
when you're truly open that opportunities come to you. And I will say personally, like in the past, it's been 4 years since I set up my company. There are days when I sit back and think, holy, how did I get all these clients? Like, how did I even end up in Sri Lanka a couple of months ago? Like, I
Yeah.
don't know.
Yeah.
But it
No.
really came from that space of being less guarded. Yes, being scared, but being
Yeah.
less guarded, sort of relinquishing some of my power with another facilitator and saying, I'm here to learn from you as well. That opened up these incredible spaces and incredible
Yeah.
opportunities.
No, you're like spot on there because I think, when you are open to understanding, open to learning, open to thinking, you are bringing in a lot of that. And I think that openness manifests itself in your energy in a weird way. Like, and I know that sounds like very hippy dippy, but there is an energy to everyone, right? Like when I start my day,
Yes.
and I start my day in a very like confined way, where I'm just like, oh my god, this is about me. It's like I'm very like introspective, but also very insular in the way that I'm operating. When I go out into the world, everyone's going to see that. Like even though I might not necessarily be showing it, maybe, or I'm thinking to myself, I'm not showing it. I am, right? And your energy, when you are saying to yourself, I'm here to have a conversation, to learn, to grow, to feel vulnerable, to feel exposed in terms of who I am. And I'm also just equally an open book as I'm expecting people to be with me. That changes your daily interaction. Like, then people immediately gravitate towards you. And I think that radiance that you get, again, like another hippie term there, but that radiance actually is something that people see. And I don't feel like it's something that you can teach right away. It's not something that people need to learn for themselves in a weird way to get to that point. But you bring that in. So I think that maybe that's what's brought a lot of this to you is that openness, right? People have seen in you that you are not someone that's going to gatekeep information from them, like connections from them, and that makes you, I feel, at least this is my understanding of it, infinitely more trustworthy because there is nothing to hide, right? And when someone sees that trust in you, it's infinitely easier to then go and build a connection and to establish a relationship because people immediately recognize. We're so good, like despite us telling people that we're not animals, we are animals. We look for the signs in each other. We
Yeah.
literally assess everyone on a daily basis, and we're just looking at each other like these are the tells. And then
Yeah.
then I enter this conversation. Then I enter an engagement, and then even my reaction is based upon that, right?
Absolutely. And
Yeah.
my like I am probably one of the most hippie people I have ever met in my life. And but also, for many years, after my mom passed, a lot of really cool people introduced me to this whole idea of the laws of attraction and what you attract is what you get, right? And last year, there's actually a book written about the scientific basis for this. And you're so right. It's when you're open to receive and you're open to give that more comes and
Mhm.
people see the radiance and it almost feels like you become a magnet for people. And just like other people who are as open, I feel very
Yeah.
drawn to them, very drawn even to their friendships and very drawn to them to say, okay, there's something here that
Yeah.
I feel, is this connection. And honestly, I think it's also about curating and creating really real human connections. I left care in 2020
Yeah.
and I I love meeting I really love learning from
Mm.
different cultures. And so while I was with care, I was very blessed to have worked with
Mhm.
people from all over the world, literally all over the world. And
Yeah.
some people, I was just very curious about them, who they were as humans. They've become
Mhm.
really good friends. So now every time they come to Nairobi, they'll come over and some of them have opened a million doors for me in different ways,
Yeah.
right? From my
Yeah.
consulting firm. And so I really believe that it's also about giving of your time and not just, sort of trying to curate these inauthentic human relationships because you want something from someone, but
Yeah.
genuinely trying to just get to know the other person as a human being. Whether or not that leads to
Absolutely.
something is fine, but just really like, when you think about, we're just one of 7 billion little souls here.
People.
And
Mm.
often when I think, gosh, Kenya is so big, but yet so small, there's so many countries and cultures and people to learn from and human experiences to learn from.
Yeah.
We only have this one life, so why not learn from others in this one life?
100%. And I think like, the authenticity is so key. to why people will come back and why people will do things for you and why people are ready to actually work with you, right? One of the things I think that we do act like, in my design practice is that building that sense of trust and empathy with a user, it's everything. You can get a user, you can get anyone to do anything that you would want to do. That's, I mean, obviously not necessarily negative, but positive.
Yeah.
But in an experience, you get anyone to do anything that you'd want to do by building that trust and that empathy in them, right? And that comes from you acknowledging who they are and what their capacities and how they're entering that experience with you. So being able to say to yourself that, like, when people are coming and connecting with you in that way, that you are being honest, you're being truthful, you're being upfront with them. People take that to heart. It's also like the best way to build trust right off the bat. It's like almost like
Yeah.
a free way to build trust. Companies will pay to try to build trust in someone in that way. When if they realize, all we need to do is be real and be authentic in who we are and transparent in who we are, we would get that for free. So that I think is so pivotal to maybe how you've been able to kind of grow in this direction. But also, I think why people remember you, right? It's like why I remember you on a daily basis is literally the fact that, like, there is truth and there is realness there, right? I know if I'm having a conversation with you, I'm not having a conversation that's going to be like just someone just making up a bunch of stuff to just tell me stuff. No,
Yeah.
it's very real. It's very true, right? One of my final questions for you, is like, when it comes to what you feel people can do to become and develop true leadership skills in themselves. What are some of the things that you feel that they should actually begin doing, or what can they start to do, or what can they put into practice to let them get to that point?
So the first I would say is get to know who you are as a person and who you are as a leader. So I was
Mm-hmm.
mentioning I teach at the UN University. One of the things we do towards the end of the course is we actually ask people to do their self-portrait, which is actually the scariest thing for most of us because it's you really writing about yourself. But what we ask people is
Yeah.
ask 12 people in your circle, whether at work, at home, family,
Mm-hmm.
friends, what are your strengths as a
Mm-hmm.
person? And what are the areas that maybe sometimes you falter because all of us have them? And
Mm-hmm.
then build your self portrait. You have to start within. You have to know yourself. You have to know your
Mm-hmm.
strengths and your limitations and more strengths because I think we've also come to, we've come to a space in our world where it's really funny. Sometimes I do this workshop stuff and part of this pair talking, like the leaders talking to each other, is
Mm-hmm.
I ask people to appreciate a
Mm-hmm.
value in the other person they see.
Yeah.
And unfortunately, in our world today, when someone tells me, "Oh my God, you're so amazing, you're so good," the tendency is like, "Oh no, no, it really wasn't me, it was nothing," rather than just saying, "Let me take that and just say thank you." Just thank
Yeah.
you for
And
sharing that.
acknowledge
So
it. Yeah.
exactly. So building, really knowing yourself, seeing your strengths,
Mm-hmm.
being appreciative of yourself because you yourself have gone through this leadership journey. You have
Mm-hmm.
gone through this life journey that has brought you to where you are. So
Mm-hmm.
that's the first, your self portrait. The second is listen, not just hear, but
Mm-hmm.
listen. Listen to the
Mm-hmm.
people around you, truly listen to what they're saying and what they're not saying, and build that skill. And it's, our world is so full of distractions. If it's not our phone, we have a smartphone that's probably buzzing when someone's calling us. There's actually a term for that. It's called digistraction. So world
Mm-hmm.
is so digistracted today. Take the time out from that to truly listen to a person. Because nowadays, when someone tells us something, we're almost like we're on our phone. I'm like, yeah, yeah, I'm totally listening, totally, like, or on our laptop.
Mm-hmm.
Take that away
Yeah.
and give even 2 minutes of your time to truly listen to a person, see what they're
Mm-hmm.
saying, see what they're not saying. That would be my second lesson. And the third is just live this human experience. Live
Mm-hmm.
this human experience. One of the biggest things we're seeing in the world of nonprofit, and we've seen it for many years, and now we're seeing it a lot more, is our world post-pandemic and everything else, it's become such a rat race that we don't take the time for our own well-being and wellness and our resilience.
Yeah. Yeah.
And I've often in my coaching or even in my team conversations, I've heard people say, we're scared to ask for a day or two off, or we're scared to say, can we stop working at 5:30 p.m.? Because our leader tells us to do it. She says, please stop
Mm-hmm.
working. Your wellness is important. But she still
Mm-hmm.
works at 5:30 p.m. and she
Mm-hmm.
still is on her emails on a Sunday afternoon instead of being
Yeah.
with family. So role model your own well-being and resilience because our
Hmm.
world is going to get so much more complex and
Yeah.
burnout is real. And so, make sure you're filling your cup. So it really all comes down to filling
Yeah.
your cup and really listening to other people and just being there for others truly and authentically as you would want them to be for you.
No, super, super valuable insights there. I feel like a lot of things that people need to be reminded of right now. A lot of people, I think, operating very much on some sort of like autonomous like driving, where they're not in control of what their body is doing, but they're just there and they're
Yeah.
present, but they've checked out a long time ago. And I think like one thing that's like really, really key there is this mental health aspect. But I think burnout is something that comes from overextending yourself. It's not something, but you are in
Yeah.
control of that, right?
Yeah.
And I don't think a job at the end of the day is that detrimental if you actually are going to actually say to yourself, I have the ability to kind of distance myself from it, right? If your job is not
Yeah.
allowing you to do that, then I think then maybe it's time for you to look for something else. But
Agreed. Agreed.
right, yeah, it's okay. No, these are really, really great insights, Reshma. I feel like we've gotten through a lot. There's actually a lot here that I think people are going to have a lot to think about, which I love. But I think for myself, I learned so much, right? And I think it's really reiterating maybe even some of the things that I go out into the world thinking that I should do more of, or I should actually like continuously like demonstrate in who I am. So I feel like this has been really, really valuable. So thank you so much for your time. Thank you so much
Thank
for
you.
actually making space for this. This was really, really nice. Where can
Thank
people
you
find
so
you
much.
now? And where and what and how can people connect with you?
So you can find me on LinkedIn at Reshma Aziz Khan or on
Hmm.
Instagram at Reshma Aziz Khan. So I use those two
Yes.
primarily. You can find me
Okay.
there. And I run a
Yeah.
company called Kenzo with Kenzo. I say Kenzo, but it's actually with an S,
Yeah.
Kenso, Kenzo Consulting. And I
Yeah.
do have a website. So if you look that up, you'll find the website. But otherwise, I'm
Awesome.
always on LinkedIn and Instagram. And I'm really always looking forward to having conversations like this. So, if it's someone who's listening
Hmm.
and you just want to have a virtual coffee, I'd be very happy to also learn from you.
Yeah. Awesome. No, I'm going to definitely like put all your links with this up. But also, yeah, please follow Reshma's content. It's always exciting. You always do something immensely cool, but also really good wellness content too, which I really love. So that part's been really nice. But thank you so much, and I'll talk to you soon.
Sounds good. Thank you and have a great day ahead.
Okay.